Hello everyone again. This is the webinar series, Topics of the Nexus of Climate Change, Fisheries and Blue Foods. And this webinar aims to highlight the impacts of climate change on fisheries, aquaculture, and the communities who depend on them. The webinar series is jointly hosted by the UN Ocean Decade programs of Blue Foods Future, Fisheries Strategies for Changing Oceans and Resilience Ecosystems, FishSCORE, Sustainability, Predictability, and Resilience of Marine Ecosystems, Supreme, Sustainability of Marine Ecosystems through Global Knowledge Networks, or SmartNet, and the Fisheries and Marine Ecosystem Model Intercomparison Project, or FishMIP, and also the endorsed project Basin Scale Events to Coastal Impacts, Becky. There's a link on the chat box to find out more information about all of the different hosting programs. So this month we are hosting two speakers. Our first speaker is Tyler Eddy, who will be presenting on climate change risk for regional marine ecosystems and fisheries. And our second speaker is Stefan Koenigstein, and will be presenting on upwelling systems as natural laboratories for understanding climate change impacts on marine ecosystems and fisheries. Each presentation will be followed by a Q&A session, and please use the Q&A box to ask your questions. So as I said, our first presenter is Tyler Eddy. Tyler is a research scientist of the Fisheries and Marine Institute at Memorial University in Canada. He's interested in past, present, and future human interactions with and ecology of marine ecosystems. Tyler is a founding coordinator of the Fisheries and Marine Ecosystem Model Intercomparison Project, FishMIP. He's also a steering committee member of the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Service Scenario-Based Intermodel Comparison, or BEST-SIN, and a founding section editor of PLOS Ecosystem, and also a visiting scientist of the Charles Darwin Research Station in Galapagos, in Ecuador. Tyler, over to you. The presentation is 20 minutes.
Great. Thanks, Kelly, for the introduction and for the invitation to speak here today. So can you see that okay in full screen mode?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. So yeah, happy to be here, and thanks to everyone for joining. So today I'm going to be speaking about some work that we've done within FishMIP that Kelly has already mentioned, looking at regional marine ecosystems and fisheries. And so I was the regional coordinator for FishMIP for the first two simulation rounds for the CMIP 5 and CMIP 6 simulations before Kelly took over as the regional coordinator a few years ago. So I'll get started. And next slide, please. So you've probably seen projections like this from the various IPCC, or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. So these are climate change projections of different variables of our oceans. So on the top left, we have sea surface temperature change under different emission scenarios, which are shown in the different colors. So we have a low emission scenario in blue, showing 1 to 1.5 degrees of warming by the end of the century, compared to a high emission scenario, which suggests as much as 4 degrees warming across the oceans. And you might notice there's bands of variability that are shown around these different projections. So these bands of variability are coming from different Earth system models that make different projections of how much the oceans are expected to warm under these different conditions. So we can say there is a fair amount of variability among the models for each of these different scenarios for sea surface temperature, for example. However, if you look top right for change in pH, there's no real bands of uncertainty that you can see, and that's due to the fact that there's very good agreement among the Earth system models about how much pH will change as a function of emission scenario. Now, if you look at the bottom left panel, that's a change in net primary production, or the amount of energy available in the system. And again, we can see that there's a large amount of variability there among Earth system models about what the expectation is for net primary productivity under different levels of climate change. So next slide, please. And so we can also plot these changes out on maps. We can look at sea surface temperature in the first row, or net primary productivity on the second row. And we can look at the historical averages of these variables. And then we can also look at the projected expectations of the variables under the low emission scenarios in the middle and the high emission scenarios on the right. And the first thing you notice about looking at the projections is that we expect to see a lot more change with more warming or with more climate change, and the right two um, maps. And there is a lot of regional variability when we're looking at things such as net primary productivity. So next slide, please. So this really is kind of the basis of what we call MIPS, or the Model Intercomparison Project approach. And this has really been championed by the IPCC and the various assessment reports that kind of are the state of the art in terms of our understanding of how climate change is expected to affect both the land and sea. And we use this framework of evaluating multiple models. So we're looking at all these different models. We're looking at those ranges of variability that I showed you in the first slide, and we're seeing whether or not there's high agreement among the different models and if there's robust evidence. And in that case, we would say that there's a high level of confidence for that projection. And then the opposite situation, if we had a low agreement and limited evidence, we'd have a lower confidence level in that projection. And if you've ever looked at any of the IPCC reports, you'll see that after each statement, there'll be a bracketing of whether or not we have high confidence or low confidence in these various projections. So next slide, please. So following this framework, and the IPCC had been making projections about what's expected to happen to the physical and the biogeochemical variables in the ocean. FishMIP was established, I think, about 10 to 12 years ago now, to try to extend that to the plankton and the fish and all the other higher trophic levels in the system. And so now FishMIP has grown to a network of more than 100 climate and marine ecosystem modelers, social scientists, economists, lawyers, historians, and integrated assessment modelers. So the work that I'm going to be presenting today is a lot of work that's happened within FishMIP over the last decade or so. Next slide, please. And so here's kind of a general schematic of how we do our FishMIP simulations. So in the top left, we have our projections from CMIP, the Coupled Model Intercomparison Project, which are those projections of temperature and net primary productivity that I've already shown you. So we can use those as inputs for our ensemble of marine ecosystem models to try to understand how they will impact and how they will flow up the food web. We can also consider socioeconomic factors such as fishing effort or marine protected areas that are also going to affect marine ecosystems. So these form our inputs into our ensemble of models. So these are what we drive the model simulations with. And then within FishMIP, we have a range of different marine ecosystem models. And then we can compare these outputs within the FishMIP ensemble itself, but then we can also compare them with other sectors such as agriculture. So we can start to tackle problems about, if agricultural production is expected to decline in a country, might we expect that the fisheries production could make up for that shortfall? Next slide, please. So within FishMIP, we really embrace diversity. So we have a range of different marine ecosystem models. You might be familiar with some of them, but we really try to bracket this range of uncertainty. So we try to be as inclusive as possible. And so we have size or age-based models. You may have heard of MISER. We've got food web models such as EcoPath with EcoSim or Atlantis. We also have species distribution models. So the approach that William Chung has championed, the dynamic bioclimate envelope model, DBEM. And then we also have hybrid models. So we have a range of different models within FishMIP that we use within this common scenario protocol and framework. Next slide, please. And so this are some of the headline results from our first paper that was led by Heike Lotze, the former lead coordinator of FishMIP. And so the main findings when we did do this coupling of the Earth system model climate change projections with the marine ecosystem models to see what would happen to the biomass in the oceans, we found in this first panel on the left that there's a large amount of variability in projected biomass declines among climate scenarios. And basically, we're seeing that the more warming or the greater emissions, the greater biomass decline that we are expecting to see. In the second panel, we found that there was similar amounts of variability in these projections due to which Earth system model we chose or which marine ecosystem model we chose. So that's shown in the left and the right panel there. And we also noticed that we have increasing variability as we increase the emissions. So the red plots show the high emission scenarios. The blue boxes show the low emission scenarios. And basically, we have more uncertainty with more warming. We're less sure of what's going to happen. In the third plot, we found that there's about a 5% loss of ocean biomass with every 1 degree Celsius of global warming. And in the fourth plot, we found that the biggest losses were found at the top of the food webs or the predators. Next slide, please. So in a follow-up paper that was led by Derek Tiddenser, who is the second overall coordinator of FishMIP, we compared those results from the CMIP5 simulations, which were presented in the previous slide, to the newest Earth system model projections from CMIP6. And we found that there was an increase in decline that was expected with these latest Earth system model simulations. And we found that there's about a 2.5% greater decline in CMIP6 projections compared to CMIP5. And this was for a no fishing scenario. So we're only looking at the climate change impact with global models. Next slide, please. And when we compared the spatial distribution of changes in biomass between the different CMIPs, so from CMIP5 to CMIP6, we found that there was a lot of change from that one generation until the next. So we can see that in some places, there's expected to be a positive change shown in blue, and in some places, we found that there was a negative change shown in red. So quite a bit of variability between these two generations of Earth system model simulations. And within this paper, we stated that the regional shifts in this direction of biomass change highlight the continued and urgent need to reduce uncertainty in projected responses of marine ecosystems to climate change to help support adaptation planning. Next slide, please. And so we know if we're thinking about trying to manage fisheries and the oceans, fisheries management decisions are usually made at regional scale. So understanding how these changes happening at a regional scale is really important. And as a follow-up to those first papers, we published a report that was led by Julia Blanchard and Camilla Noviglio in the FAO, which was really trying to understand how these risks to marine ecosystems and fisheries are taking place at the country level, where fisheries management and adaptation decisions are taking place. Next slide. So within FishMIP, we have both global models, so really trying to represent, the global ocean processes and kind of understanding the balance of these different processes at this large scale. And we also have regional models that were oftentimes developed for fisheries management specific purposes with a lot of regionally collected data. So we have these sort of two different scales of models. And one of the things that we've been doing within FishMIP is trying to understand whether or not these models agree at regional scale. So does a global model, when you zoom into a specific region, does it give us a similar answer that we would get as if we used the regional model that was developed with a lot of regionally collected data for that region? So these are the different regions where we had regional models within FishMIP. Some of them participated only in the CMIP5 or the first round of simulation is shown in red. Some of them only participated in CMIP6, shown in blue. And then we had two models in Southeast Australia and the Cook Strait of New Zealand that participated in both the CMIP5 and CMIP6 simulation rounds. So for each one of these regions, we're comparing the regional model to that ensemble of global models for that specific region. So we're kind of doing a global regional comparison. Next slide, please. And the question we really wanted to answer was, do regional and global models agree on climate change projections at these regional scales? So I'm just going to orient you with this figure. So each one of these rows represents one of those different regions that you saw in the map from the previous slide. And the columns represent two different Earth system models. So we have the GFDL model developed in Princeton and the IPSL model developed in France. And these models sort of bracket a range of warming. So the GFDL typically projects a lower amount of warming compared to the IPSL, which typically projects a greater amount of warming. So these are the models we use within FishMIP to kind of contrast and bracket that range of uncertainty. Now, in each one of these boxes, the global model mean is shown in the red line, and the range of variability is shown in the shaded area. And then the regional model is shown in the blue color. So one of the things when we started comparing the regional models with this global ensemble is we found that on average, the biomass declines were greater for the global models than for the regional. So we found that the biomass decline was 6% for regional models on average, compared to 18% at the end of the century for global models. And we found that global models were more often projecting biomass declines in simulations compared to regional models. So this was in the first simulation round within CMIP 5. Next slide, please. And for CMIP 6, we found a similar trend in that regional models projected a decline of 18% by 2100, whereas global models projected about a 27% decline. And global models projected biomass declines in all simulations compared to 60% of simulations for regional models. Next slide, please. We also looked to see how these models were responding to various levels of temperature change. And when we did a comparison of looking at the change in biomass on the vertical axis to the change in temperature on the horizontal axis for each of these different ecosystem model types, we found that all models showed a negative relationship between the change in sea surface temperature and the change in total consumer biomass. So with more warming, we expect more decline in biomass. However, we found that temperature explained the most variability in biomass change for DBPM, macroecological, miser, and boat. So those are 4 different model types, and all of those are size-based models. So this is giving us a clue that maybe the type of ecosystem model that we're using is an indicator of how much of a biomass change we might expect to see. Next slide. Now, we did the same comparison for the relationship between change in biomass on the vertical axis with the change in net primary productivity on the horizontal axis for each of these different FishMIP models, both global and regional. And we found that most models had a positive relationship between the change in net primary productivity and total consumer biomass. So as primary productivity increases, we have more biomass in the system. And we found that the NPP explained the most variability in biomass change for EcoPath with EcoSim, EcoOcean, boats, and zooms. And again, those are 4 different FishMIP models. Next slide. Now, we've speculated on some of the reasons why we might observe these mismatches between regional and global models. So regional models often have greater functional diversity and ecological or taxonomic resolution, which might provide greater resilience of the system to the perturbation, which is the change in temperature and net primary productivity. Regional models generally include more processes and resolve predator-prey interactions more explicitly than global models. And the core spatial resolution of coastal regions in global Earth system models, while regional models are often developed at finer scale. So again, a bit of a mismatch in this scale between the global scale and the regional scale. Next slide. And so within FishMIP, we've now established a new simulation round, and this is being led by Kelly Ortega, our host. And so this is a paper, if you're interested to read more about our next simulation protocol framework that we've developed in order to try to tease out some of these differences that we're observing between regional and global models. Next slide. And we've also developed a skill assessment framework in order to be able to evaluate the agreement, with the models, with observed variables or fisheries catch, for example. So if you're interested to read more, you can check out this paper that was led by Nina Reen. And both of these papers are open access in Earth Future. Next slide. So just to summarize, hopefully I haven't made you too dubious about the marine ecosystem modeling world, but we like to think within FishMIP that variation is a good thing. And it forces us to go back to our models and try to understand what are the processes that are leading to the variation. So it's sort of a tool that we use to understand how our models are working. But in general, we found that global models projected greater biomass declines than regional, so 12% greater in the CMIP 5 simulations and 9% greater in the CMIP 6 simulations. For both global and regional models, greater biomass declines were projected using CMIP 6 than CMIP 5. So this latest generation of projections tends to predict greater declines. And IPSL projections tend to predict greater declines than GFDL simulations. And our present FishMIP simulation round is poised to tease out the variation between global and regional model projections. So this is really something that we're continuing to work on moving forward. Next slide. And so if you're interested to read more or learn more about FishMIP, you can check out our website, fishmip.org. All of the publications that I showed you in this presentation can be found there. And if you wish to reach me, you can find my email address here. And I think I've got 5 minutes for questions. So I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler, for a great presentation. Everyone, please post your questions on the Q&A box. If you have any questions, please. Tyler, I will start with a question while people are typing. I remember it was the Atlantis models that did not respond to the net primary production like according to expectation. Was that correct? Because it was two Atlantis models that participated and both of them were, I think they have the opposite trend compared to the other models. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we're trying to get at the moment. And really, we looked at net primary productivity and sea surface temperature because those are the variables that are driving most of the ensemble within FishMIP. But some models are actually pulling in a lot of other environmental variables, such as oxygen or pH. So there could be other mechanisms that are at play that are not just being driven by NPP specifically. And those simulations weren't designed as specific experiments where we're only manipulating NPP and we're holding everything else constant. Those were the simulations where we're just looking at how much NPP changed by the end of the century. And then we look at the corresponding biomass change. So we haven't sort of done a fully controlled experiment in those plots. So it's not necessarily possible to specifically tease it out. It's more of an indication of the model behavior.
Thank you, Tyler.
But
There's another question here from Gassen. He's asking what are the main sources of uncertainty considering the FishMIP projections, and did you compare different regional models within the same region to assess the impact of model type?
yeah, two great questions. So the first question about the main sources of uncertainty. So we considered the certainty as according to the CMIP or the simulation round. So that was CMIP 5 versus CMIP 6, which I mentioned. We considered the uncertainty as a function of emission scenario. So those are the RCP scenarios. And we also considered uncertainty as a function of model type, so the regional and the global. So those were kind of the main sources that we've considered. And then the second question, did you consider or did you compare different model types within the same region? So we had one region, and that's actually Kelly's region. So she gets the gold star in the southern Benguela, where we had both an Atlantis model and an ecopath with ecosim model. And actually they projected opposite. So I think the ecopath projected increase and Atlantis decrease in biomass. So again, this is something we're looking into further, not only why Atlantis is behaving differently, but within the ensemble of FishMIP models, there's a lot of variability there. So we're trying to set up some additional simulations and experiments to understand why these models are behaving the way they do. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Tyler. I don't see any other questions. Maybe wait to see if there's any other question. But if not, then maybe we can transition to our next speaker. Thanks again, Tyler, for the presentation. That was really interesting.
My pleasure.
Okay, so I don't see any more questions. So then we can move to our second speaker, Stefan Koenigstein. Stefan leads the newly established working group Ecosystems and Resource Sustainability at the Leibniz Centre for Tropical Marine Research in Bremen in Germany. He has previously worked as a project scientist at the University of California, Santa Cruz and NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center, where he worked on multi-species population dynamic models for forage fish species in the California current. He has also worked in interdisciplinary research projects in Peru, Portugal, and Norway, linking marine ecology to fisheries with an additional focus on incorporating local stakeholder input. And Stefan has also led the development of an education tabletop game for high schools and environmental education groups that teaches an understanding of ocean systems and their users. Stefan, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kelly. And hi, everyone. I'm Stefan Koenigstein. So Kelly just introduced myself. Will give you a talk on the work that I do in upwelling systems, using them as natural laboratories for understanding climate change impacts on marine ecosystems and fisheries. So basically, very related to what Tyler presented, but a slightly different approach to investigating the same question. Next slide, please. So I think I will be brief on the introduction because you've heard a very good background on the question here. So the different environmental drivers in the ocean that are linked to climate change were mentioned: ocean warming, deoxygenation, acidification, change in salinity, currents and stratification, and of course changes in lower trophic level productivity, which then impact fish and other higher trophic levels. So for fish, we already see distribution shifts and ecosystem changes recorded in many regions of the world oceans. So there's this simplified overview that you can see in the plot at the center that basically fish communities are expected to change, to move towards the poles, but also decreasing in individual size. And so this has different impacts on polar high latitudes and the tropics, for example. But also the future impacts will depend on the region that we're looking at. Oceanographic regions have very specific characteristics depending on if you're looking at a high latitude spring bloom system or an upwelling system, for example, which is what this talk will focus on. Next slide, please. So eastern boundary upwelling systems are very specific systems at the eastern side of the main oceans. You may know that they're very highly dynamic. They have a very high productivity. Small pelagic fish or forage fish are very important usually, and then they are also highly variable, and they're strongly linked to climate in those systems. And they have this typical boom-bust fluctuations, and they're also key for energy transfer to higher trophic levels. So what I do is I use ecological models to better understand these systems, and I kind of focus on mechanistic models. In general, these models are tools to understand the behavior of the system and its different components, and project into the future, and understand climate driving on the ecosystems and fisheries. I do that usually by using output from ocean biology chemical models and hindcast and future projections. And I will show two examples from my recent work. One is in the California current on the US West Coast using a multi-species model of intermediate complexity, and the other one is in the Northern Humboldt current system, the Peruvian coast, where we have a spatial food web model. Next slide, please. So it's just briefly showing that the changes in one species will depend on the interactions in the food web also. Next slide, please. But also as humans are kind of part of the food web here. So fisheries impacts change mortality in different species, and that has repercussions on the food web. Next slide, please. So the first example I wanted to show you is, as I said, the California current. This is kind of where the idea of boom and bust cycles of small pelagic fish species is coming from. Sardine and anchovy are a very important species here. And there's this historical changes in productivity and biomass that kind of led to the interpretation of alternative regimes between those two species that are linked to ocean temperature and larger scale climate conditions, such as the Pacific decadal oscillation. So the classic view here was that sardine profits from a warmer ocean state and anchovy from a cooler ocean state. Unfortunately, for the last 10 years or so, after several years of marine heat waves, Niños and other warm conditions, just the opposite happened. And contrary to expectations, sardine remains collapsed, but anchovy has seen a bit of a return. So there's a very interesting system to kind of test these assumptions of environmental linkage. Next slide, please. So what I did here is, together with partners at the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center at UC Santa Cruz, I used their ocean and biogeochemical model output, regionally data simulated hindcast, and 3 downscaled Earth system model projections out to the end of the century. I'm sorry, there's a color legend missing here. So the black line is the historical. There's the hindcast, and the 3 colored lines are the 3 different Earth system models, GFDL, IPSL, and Hadley, projected into the future under a high emission scenario. Next slide, please. And then the model I developed here is a model of intermediate complexity. It's kind of a age-structured population model. It has very high resolution on the early life stages, so it has explicit representation of eggs and larvae and the processes that impact their mortality and development. So it's kind of mechanistic, so it has different environmental parameters impact the biological rates at different stages. So for example, the smaller planktonic food items are important for larval survival, and the larger items are important for consumption and egg production and so on. And then it's a closed life cycle, so egg production feeds directly into the eggs then in this model. This is fitted to age structure data from a long-term stock assessment, spatial survey data. And one specific thing that I do is to try to quantify uncertainty, ecological uncertainty, by not doing only one model configuration, but about 300 of them based on a global sensitivity analysis. And then I pick an ensemble of 9 representative configurations in this case, and fitted over the hindcast. They all kind of reproduce the same data in the stock assessment for the biomass or abundance of the stock. You can see there's a range. So there's small deviations, and there's a deviation in the driving mechanisms that are more important across the ensemble. Next slide, please. For anchovy, there wasn't data availability wasn't so high. There hasn't been a long-term stock assessment or something like this, for the simple reason that the biomass has been lower, much lower over the last decades. But there are different survey indices that were available, so ship-based surveys, but also a predation index from California sea lion scats that we kind of used for the first time here to calibrate an ecosystem model. So here the fit is kind of a compromise between different time series and trying to cover the range of uncertainties here also. That using the functional response that we fit to sea lions has the additional advantage that we kind of get a range for those functional responses also. So for the kind of response that we can expect from sea lions when there's a change in anchovy biomass. And all of these model configurations, so there's some uncertainty in the older data series in the 1980s, but for the rest of the period, we kind of span that range of estimates, and all these model configurations reproduce this recent increase in anchovy. Next slide, please. So here's a small example what you can do with this kind of mechanistic model where we have a relatively high process representation. If you just look at egg production data alone or biomass data alone or just the number of recruits, they're pretty highly correlated, and you can't really pick out a signal. But for example, if you integrate all the adult processes on the top graph to the right here, the eggs that are produced per biomass, then you can see that there was a very high egg production actually in the years already before those very warm years in the 2010s. And if you look at the graph below that, you see look at recruits per egg, so recruitment success. You can see that in recent years, the recruitment success was decent, but not extraordinarily good. So it actually reproduces the biomass increase in the model. Here is kind of the coincidence of these two processes, of these two sets of drivers, but also their lag. So the pretty good recruitment just after a good egg production period is kind of what produces the increase here. So the different processes and lag may be very important actually to drive the population dynamics. Next slide, please. These are the future projections for sardine and anchovy based on the 3 downscaled Earth system models that I showed in the beginning. For sardine, we see that there's some decadal scale biomass fluctuations reproduced from the environmental driver input. We also see some long-term trends. So especially under the fast warming models, Hadley and IPSL, we've seen an increase in anchovy biomass and a recovery. And in anchovy, we don't quite see a longer term increase, but we see like short temporary booms, population spikes, but not really a new anchovy regime. And what you see here, maybe to say that is the range of these 9 ensemble configurations. The darker color is the inner range of 7 of 9. And the gray area is uncertainty that is tested by different sensitivity analysis, changing the thermal response of the early life stages here. Next slide, please. So one thing I wanted to kind of show also was that although you have a lot of uncertainty and, for example, forecasting biomass, there's other things you can forecast where uncertainty can kind of even out. So for here example, we looked at the shift in fisheries landings from the southern ports to the northern ports. This incorporates the dynamic migrations of the population, age structure of the catch, and so on. And if you just look at the relative percentage, not considering biomass, you see that in the long term, towards the end of the century, the northern ports kind of get close to 50% of the catches for Pacific sardine. So this can also be helpful information for long-term strategic planning. Next slide, please. Just two other small ideas of how to apply this type of model. So what we did then, we assessed the kind of the probability over the whole ensemble and the whole sensitivity analysis. So this incorporates different initialization values, different starting points on all the ensemble that I described. And if you then even you calculate a probability over a 20-year interval to kind of calculate that over these boom and busts also, then you can see that there's a significant change under a high emission scenario, which is the red line. So you get an increased probability of a bust population state and a decreased probability of a boom or solid population state. This is for the northern anchovy population. So showing that even considering all the uncertainty that we have, there's a significant difference and impact of this strong emission climate scenario. Another thing that we've been doing is using the output of this recruitment of this model and the uncertainty range on it to run that to a management strategy evaluation for sardine. When again, you can use this as input to introduce variation and test management rules under this uncertainty. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this will be the second case study for Peru. Peru is another classic upwelling system with Peruvian anchoveta as one of the largest fishes in the world. Also highly variable, has a huge range of other small-scale fisheries all along the coast that are very important for the coastal communities. Here, together with partners in Peru, we've built a spatial food web model in the EcoPath framework to better understand the productivity and variability of the ecosystem and the fish populations and the fisheries. This is again coupled to a high resolution ocean biology chemical model, which provides temperature, oxygen, phytoplankton, zooplankton productivity as drivers to the food web model. And since we have a lot of species in there, the application here is a bit more to assess food web shifts, also impacts of environmental changes and fishing on the different resources, and then test ecosystem-based management and policy options. Nice thing that I always like to see here is the comparison of the global model and the regional model, where you can see that this downscaling process really does a much better job on actually reproducing the cold temperatures here shown that are linked to the upwelling. Next slide, please. This is a quick overview of the food web. Not even all of the species. We have in total 46 different functional groups, and we have 14 industrial and artisanal fisheries fleets in the model. Next slide, please. This is again calibrated using a hindcast, temperature, plankton productivity, and oxygen from the ocean biology chemical hindcast. Uses physiological response functions in the model for temperature and oxygen and the depth of the oxycline. Uses phytoplankton and zooplankton groups, kind of overriding the plankton biomass in the food web model. And this is also fitted to different data sources from surveys, stock assessments, and landings. And we aimed here to recreate the rough population patterns and variability and spatial distribution for the most important species. Next, please. So the changes expected here, again, from the downscaled projections under 3 Earth system models, are mainly a warming again of a bit more than 3 degrees by the end of the century under a high emission scenario, and about ½ degree under a low emission scenario. Planktonic productivity decreases by about 10% under the high emission scenario. What you can see in this plot is the range of the 3 downscaled models and the mean of them. And this 10% decrease is kind of the mean over all the plankton groups, but that is more pronounced in the diatoms and mesozooplankton, which are more the classical upwelling system food chain. And also in oxycline, we see some changes in one of the 3 models. Those are shown separately in the bottom line. One of the 3 downscaled models shows a shoaling of the oxycline by a few meters until the end of the century, which could potentially impact fish habitat and trophic interactions, and also their availability to fisheries. And totally you see there's a very high amount of interannual variability here, which is also important for the system. If you come, but there's still a long-term trend on top of it. Next slide, please. So these are just very preliminary projections that we produced for the different species, for the biomass of different pelagic species, coastal and further offshore. These are under high emission scenario, changes in the food web. So they're the product of the environmental responses directly driving the species and the food web interactions indirectly impacting through competition or food availability. We also assess changes in spatial distribution. This is kind of work in progress. And this impacts, for example, in the north, the small-scale fisheries, where more species are moving out than moving in. Next slide, please. Just quickly, one thing I wanted to show here at the end is how we use these projections here. In Peru, we work a lot with stakeholders in a participatory modeling approach. And one exercise that we've done, we developed regionalized scenarios based on the SSB scenarios. We worked with the stakeholders and experts from Peru to kind of develop relevant local conditions and framing factors in the scenarios that are consistent and meaningful to the stakeholders, and also derive model parameters, for example, for the fisheries fleet dynamics that are consistent with these overall narratives. And we use that to co-evaluate the changes in fisheries and other ecosystem services, and to co-identify adaptation options and develop ecosystem-based adaptation strategies. Next slide, please. So this was a recent workshop where in northern Peru, with fishers from different small-scale fisheries, we showed them the preliminary projections. We discussed what it means for their business, for their livelihoods. We showed them the regionalized socioeconomic scenarios, discussed those, and evaluated climate change impacts, potential conflicts, and possible ecosystem-based governance strategies under two different scenarios, one unsustainable and one sustainable one. Next slide, please. So as finally, this is a small overview over the scenarios. This is the unsustainable scenario based on SSP3, regional rivalry and displacement, where we have political instability, bad infrastructure, more pollution, more resource extraction, less regulation of fisheries, more competition by foreign fleets, higher chance of deoxygenation and impacts on biodiversity. Next slide, please. This is in contrast to that. This is a sustainable scenario based on SSP1, where we discussed with the stakeholders here at this workshop better political stability, improved infrastructure, more support for artisanal fisheries and aquaculture, more biodiversity conservation, more technological innovation, and so on. And what really impressed me was that basically the fishery stakeholders were all on board with aiming for a scenario more like this. Even if it could, you could think in some conditions it could mean more restrictions for them. But overall, this was a world that everybody was much happier with, and this was a useful exercise to kind of bring the ecological model projections together with other overarching factors. Next slide, please. So yes, this is just very quickly the conclusions. I'm really fascinated with upwelling systems because they're highly variable, but also they've shown that ecological changes in the ecosystem often turn out different than expected. And regional models, which have mechanisms, can help to understand drivers of change and their interactions and the responses of species. They can also be projected into the future. And we generally see a clear warming trend in upwelling systems, just as in most areas of the world oceans, strength depending on the greenhouse gas emissions. There's likely going to be a slight reduction in phytoplankton and zooplankton productivity and the current generation of regional models. The deoxygenation could be an additional risk associated with high emissions, which could change interactions in the system, impact, for example, the oxygen minimum zone. So overall, to do these projections, it's really important to combine the environment with ecosystem processes, but also with socioeconomic drivers. All this kind of downscaling of socioeconomic scenarios that we've been doing, because then we can really try to develop regional governance strategies. That's it. Next slide is a final slide. Because this is highly interdisciplinary, there's a lot of people who contributed to this. A lot of thanks to them, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for the presentation. That was really nice to see all of the work you've been doing in Peru. We are open now for questions. So if you have any questions, please type them on the Q&A box. Let's see if there's any questions here. Tyler wants to go for it. Go, Tyler.
Apparently, I can't type into the Q&A box, but I'm going to use this opportunity to ask in person.
Yeah, apparently.
So thanks, Stefan. That was really interesting. Cool to see the regional work. Given that the upwelling systems are inherently highly dynamic. Did you find in your stakeholder working groups or your workshops that the ability to adapt to a changing future environment was maybe there's a greater capacity than there would be in other tropical systems that are more stable and maybe they're experiencing less changes historically?
That's a really good question. I've been thinking about that for the question many times. I think so, yes, probably. We see a lot of adaptive capacity in them. They're used to resources being down for a year or two or more. They have to find other jobs. They're moving to different areas. They're buying different fishing gear, for example, trying to adapt. I kind of can't pin down if it's really higher than in other places. I think fisheries are have to be pretty adaptive in many regions of the world. I guess so, because of this high El Nino variability is very prominent in Peru, especially. So it's even to the point that it's kind of difficult to talk to them about long-term changes because this interannual variability is kind of so overriding almost everything. Yeah, it would be a very interesting thing to actually analyze that on the level of the social ecological system, if it's more resilient than in other places, maybe.
Yeah, that's cool. I guess I would think about whether or not the future variability is greater than, the observed pattern of variability, and then also doing that comparison with other tropical regions where, their future variability might go outside of what they've observed historically, and how that could affect the adaptive capacity. But I guess it's also measuring adaptive capacity could be a challenge as well, I can imagine.
Yeah, I think I'm usually stuck at the level of trying to collect adaptation options and then like simulating this together with the stakeholders. Really quantify adaptive capacity would be the next step. Yeah, well, it would be an interesting endeavor to try to do that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. I don't see any other questions. So, Tyler, there was one question for you. I think we still have time to try to answer it, and it was Kathy was asking. She was interested in hearing more about how the FishMIP model results, especially at regional scales, are being used in fisheries management and decisions. It's on the webinar chat question, not on the Q&A.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess, there are a lot of regions, Canada and the US and Germany, where there, are well-resourced departments that have modeling teams that are capable of developing these regional models, some of which Stefan has pointed to. But there are definitely a lot of countries that don't necessarily have that capacity. And we're very aware of that within FishMIP. And so that is, part of what we try to do in working with the FAO is to be able to provide guidance to those countries that might not have that regional modeling capacity. And Julia Blanchard presented that FAO report at the UN Coffee, I think in 2024. And I remember there was a question from Morocco and basically saying, okay, these projections that you've provided for the Moroccan EEZ showing declines in the potential of fish biomass production, is that something that we should be acting on? So I think, this is something within FishMIP we're striving to improve. We do understand there is variation in projections depending on, if you look at regional models or global models. But I think, it's necessary to keep pushing forward in this because there are lots of places where there isn't necessarily a regional modeling capacity to tackle these. So thank you for the question if you're still there.
Thank you, Tyler. Stefan, there's one more question for you on the Q&A box, and the question is from Hassan, and he's asking if you have an idea about to what extent will future fishing strategies affect the stock status of anchovy and sardine compared to the impacts of changes in environmental conditions.
Oof, that's a big question. Yeah, that's I would say it's a long-term question that I'm trying to answer. I'm not sure if you're referring to a specific system or to both of them or all of the EBAs. I think, I don't know, I'd like to start simple maybe. I think in in general, in most of the cases where we have seen fish stocks collapse, it's probably been a combination of both, of overfishing and bad environmental conditions. And it's probably the same for small pelagic fish. And I know that, for example, in Peru, there have been adaptations in management regimes to quickly respond to El Nino impacts on the fisheries and reduce harvesting. Same, for example, trying to reduce impacts on juveniles when they overlap in space. So I think it's important to kind of use these types of models to come up with better strategies that are robust to be able to respond to the environment and to limit fisheries to a sustainable level. That's I think the main aim of it. And if I'm really trying to play a crystal ball on this and saying what's changing in the future, I'm not so sure. So as I showed, I think the trends may be different for different species. To assess the ecosystem shifts we have and all the uncertainties, it's an ongoing work. It's a process that I probably can't give a definite answer yet to. I hope that answers your question, even if it doesn't really answer it.
It does. I think it's time for us to wrap up. We're almost on the hour. So thank you again to you, Tyler and Stefan, for the great presentations. We really enjoyed it, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. The webinar recording and a summary of the webinar will be available on the FishSCORE website, and there's I think a link on the chat where we will be able to put the recording, and you will also be able to find past recordings of the past webinars on the Q&A, on the webinar chat. Okay, thank you very much. Our next webinar will be in late March. We will see you next time.